Hello again. I'm going to be talking to you briefly today about levels of organization and how things become more complex as you increase those levels. The more things you add, the more complex it becomes. And of course, what we'll be referring to will be organisms, the human organism in particular. But I want to give you a couple of examples first of how, when you add things, whatever you're looking at is becoming more and more complex and taking on new characteristics. So I'd like to ask you first, have you ever played with Legos? You know, the little blocks that you snap together and make things? Well, when you first began this playing with Legos, you start with a pile of blocks. Each individual block is just one little piece, one Lego, and that's all it is. The little rectangle or a little shape has some little pegs on it, not very complicated. But as you begin to add other blocks to that, snapping them together, you can form a line or you can form a wall. So you start to build something. Well, whatever you've built there is going to be a little bit more complex and have a different characteristic than one individual block. You may put 2 blocks high and 6 blocks long, and you've built sort of a little wall there. That wall is certainly different than one Lego. You can continue to add and to build until you form a house, and then perhaps you add a couple of rooms to that house. So that house is becoming more and more complex than the walls, which are more complex than the individual Legos. Well, let's continue to build, and let's make a Lego city with many buildings. That Lego city with its many buildings is more complex than one building, which is more complex than one wall of blocks, which is more complex than the individual blocks. So as you continue to add and to build and to put things together, they form a unit, they form a whole, they form something that's very different than just the pieces. So you end up with something that is more complex because you have things working together. So that's sort of the idea behind what we're going to be talking about in this video, how things become more complex, how the organism, the human, is made up of all of its pieces and parts. And those pieces and parts working together are what give you life. So let's move on, I guess before we move, let's talk just a little bit about another example I have here on this slide. If you look, I began with the letter I. I is a very simple letter, not a whole lot that you can say about an I, right? I refers to me if I'm the one talking, pretty simple. If we add one more letter to it, I becomes N. The word N certainly doesn't mean the same thing as the word I. Let's add another letter. Now we have pen. Pen. You stick someone with a pen, right? You push a pen into a voodoo doll. Well, that's very different than N, very different than I. And all we did was add something to it. Now let's add another letter. Let's put an E on the end, and we have pine. You know what a pine tree is. You know the pine smell of Lysol, of Pine Sol, if you've ever used that to clean your floors. So that's different than pen, it's different than N, it's different than I, and it's becoming a little more complicated, a little more complex, has different characteristics. Let's add a couple of more letters. Let's stick an AL on the end, and we end up with pineal or pineal. This is a gland that's located within the brain, helps to regulate your sleep and wake cycle. So that's certainly more complex. So we've added a letter or two and changed the characteristics of what we were talking about, becoming different because we continue to add things. So now let's take this to the human body and talk about how things change in the body, how all these pieces work together to form the body. All these pieces and parts, from the most simple to the most complex, ending with the organism, the human. So we'll begin our talk with atoms. Atoms are the smallest part of an element. An element is like carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, which if you write it all together out, you have SNOP, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Those are the most common elements found in the human body. But the smallest little pieces of those are called atoms. Those atoms can combine to become molecules. So if you combine those atoms, put them together, now they're different than each individual atom. So let's say we have an atom of hydrogen. And let's have another atom of hydrogen. Let's add an atom of oxygen. Does that look familiar to anyone? HHO? Maybe not so much, but let's change it around and say we have two H's and an O. Everyone knows that H2O is water. So you see that it became different. Those atoms working together took on a new characteristic. Instead of just being two hydrogens and one oxygen, now we have water, which is different, has different characteristics than the individual atoms. Now molecules can be very large, and in which case they may be macromolecules. Macromolecules, some examples of which are proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, which are fats, and nucleic acids. These can be combined to form structures known as organelles. Organelles are small things found within the body cells. Those organelles have a specific job to do, such as the nucleus is an organelle found within the cell. It houses the DNA. The mitochondria is an organelle within the cell. It is where energy is made, where the molecule ATP that you'll learn about is made. Okay, so organelles are like different areas within a factory. If the cell is a factory, the organelles are the different areas within that. If you're building a car in your factory, you'll have one place that's responsible for building the chassis, another place responsible for putting in the transmission, all the different pieces and parts. So the organelles are those specialized little compartments that have a specific job to do. Those organelles are found within cells. Now, a cell is the smallest unit of structure that contains all of the characteristics of life. So that means cells can grow and they can reproduce and all the other characteristics of life that you should be familiar with. The book's got some pretty good reading on this as well. But just remember, the cell does everything that the organism does, but in a little bit of a different way. So it simply means that the cell itself exhibits all of those characteristics of life. Cells, some examples of which are red blood cells, muscle cells, nerve cells, liver cells, kidney cells, loads and loads and loads of cells. Now when cells come together to work as a group, a mass of cells becomes tissue. Tissue is when you have a group of cells working together to form a common type of structure that provides a job or does a job within the body. So muscle tissue, that should be pretty obvious. Muscle tissue is used to move the body around, to help support the body. You have tissue that makes up your skin. You have connective tissues and muscle tissues and nervous tissue and epithelial tissues. All these tissues form organs. Okay? So all your tissues work together to form organs. Now within an organ you may find many different types of tissues, but together those tissues work to do a job. The job of the pancreas, made up of types of tissue, the pancreas works to regulate blood sugar. It works to secrete digestive enzymes. The heart is an organ. There are connective tissues found in the heart and around the heart. There are muscle tissues found in the heart. Those tissues work together to form that pumping action so that your heart keeps beating. Okay, so an organ has a job to do as well. Now, organs can be combined into organ systems. An organ system is simply a group of organs that work together for a common purpose, such as the digestive system. The digestive system is not just your stomach and your intestines, but your mouth is a part of the digestive system. The esophagus is part of the digestive system. The stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, the colon, the anus, there's all of these pieces and parts working together to form the digestive system. And we have many systems found within the body, and those systems, which you'll hear about on the next video, all work together to form the organism, and in this case, the organism is the human body. So think about how complicated you are. You start with some atoms all put together to to make molecules, and big old molecules or macromolecules, which may be organelles. Organelles do a job within a cell. Cells all clump together to make tissues. Tissues all work together to make organs. Organs are a part of systems, and all those systems together work together to make the organism, to maintain life. Now, just one last thing I want to point out to you here. Here is another screenshot. So once you've completed your video and it closes, you'll be directed to go to a link, and it's simply a little drag and drop exercise where you will move these labels over here to the corresponding pictures, just to help reinforce some of these concepts that we've covered. I'll talk to you again soon about organ systems. Have a good day.